The Last of Us Part 2 was a very controversial addition to the universe, and its reputation really hasn't gotten better with the second season of the HBO adaptation. But the Last of Us IP is still one of the most iconic in gaming history, and there have been several leaks floating around the internet that suggest a third game might be closer than we think, and unfortunately no, I'm not talking about the now canceled multiplayer game. Today we're going to be going over all of the news and leaks about The Last of Us Part 3, so let me know down in the comments if you're actually interested in a third installment to this franchise, and let's get started. So there was a leak that surfaced a couple years ago that started to make its way around the internet again, where someone made the claim that The Last of Us Part 3 would feature 3 playable characters, and while they didn't confirm the names or identities of the characters, they did say that one of the 3 would actually be playable during a flashback sequence, but those flashbacks would be set during the first days and years of the outbreak. It was implied that the other 2 playable characters would be Ellie and Abby, but to the leakers' credit, they never said that. They simply said that there would be 3 playable characters, and one of the 3 would be limited to flashbacks set during the beginning of the outbreak. But as for why this leak started making waves again, that's actually due to the fact that the leaker also said that Naughty Dog's next game would be something totally new and have nothing to do with The Last of Us. And this was long before Intergalactic was confirmed, so now that Naughty Dog has confirmed Intergalactic as their next game, people are starting to go back and look at this leak with a little bit more legitimacy. It's not a lot to go off of, but it's something, right? Personally, I think this leak has a bit of power behind it. Naughty Dog is at a bit of a weird place with The Last of Us IP right now because, on one hand, they probably want to continue the story of their recognizable characters like Abby and Ellie, but on the other hand, those stories were pretty definitively wrapped up, as disappointing as the wrap-up may have been. So what do they do now? Do they bring back Abby and Ellie for another sequel? Do they bring back Abby and Ellie but focus on other points of their lives? Or do they go in a completely new direction with entirely new characters? After all, the world of The Last of Us is extremely deep, and there's still a ton that is yet to be explored in the games. So there's not really any reason why a third game has to focus on established characters. Naughty Dog has also made it very clear with their recent games like The Last of Us Part 2 and Uncharted Lost Legacy that they've been enjoying making games with multiple playable protagonists. So I can totally believe that The Last of Us 3 is going to take their concept even further with 3 playable characters. The idea of a playable character entirely dedicated to the early era of the breakout could be an amazing concept to explore. Assuming this leak is legit, I can see how this could play out in an awesome way. Imagine Last of Us 3 set around the time of the second game, roughly where society has largely started rebuilding from the outbreak, but there are still various areas of unrest and infected hordes wandering around. We follow the stories of 2 characters trying to navigate personal issues in the midst of this broken world, but every once in a while we get flashback sequences to the early days of the outbreak, and we get to watch society collapse in real time. This way we get the juxtaposition of the world struggling to rebuild itself and view of the world as it started to fall apart. Now, one theory that has also been going around is a bit of a piggyback off of the 3 character leak. What if the 3 characters is Ellie, but the other 2 characters are entirely new? Abby's arc is pretty much done, and I don't really see how much she could be expanded upon with the new installment, but Ellie could really use a bit of a redemption arc after the way her story was handled in Last of Us Part 2. I guess you could say that it made sense for her to go down the route that she did, but ultimately, I think a lot of Last of Us fans would like one last ride with this fan favorite character, and they would definitely like to play a Last of Us game that doesn't have her in such horrific conflict nonstop. And I know Ellie's suffering was a part of this second game's main theme, but it was definitely difficult for a lot of us to watch, and it didn't exactly send the character off in the best way, if you understand what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with a character suffering, but after the perfect ending of Part 1, Part 2 really made it feel like they were just piling on the misery, and it didn't sit with a lot of fans. I think this is the perfect opportunity for Naughty Dog to do somewhat of a course correction to almost correct the record and allow Ellie to have a more positive story that builds upon Part 2's ending, instead of just allowing the misery of Part 2 to be her official story end. What if The Last of Us Part 3 takes place after The Last of Us 2, and we see how Ellie is living her life after the tragic ending of the previous game, rebuilding herself and learning to be a normal person again, while also doing her best to help those in need as society struggles to rebuild itself. She's moved on to a new part of the country and has found herself new allies and a new story to tell. And maybe the second playable character is one of her new acquaintances, as they try to achieve some kind of common goal of rebuilding, while the third character shows how this part of the country collapsed during the outbreak. Like, let's say they're in New York, for instance, and they're trying to rebuild it, and then every couple of hours we get like a flashback section that shows us how that section of New York was destroyed. That could really be a compelling way to give us a third part to Ellie's story, allowing her to get some redemption after part 2, while also expanding upon the universe a bit and showing more of the world off. As you probably know by now, the multiplayer game that was in development for a long time was officially scrapped by Naughty Dog, but there have been some theories going around that a lot of those assets are going to be reused for Last of Us Part 3, which would result in a significantly quicker development cycle. And I know it may sound a little strange for a single player game to be reusing multiplayer game assets, but what I mean is that the models, animation, sound effects, and the environments could be recycled in The Last of Us Part 3, so even though it's not a multiplayer game, a lot of the work can be sped up since the team isn't going to be working from scratch. Plus, it's possible that the multiplayer project will be revived in some way to release alongside The Last of Us Part 3, because a lot of you may have actually forgotten this, but Last of Us actually had a fantastic multiplayer mode, but it was cut from Part 2 as well as the Part 1 remake for some reason. So personally, I'm really hoping that the fact that The Last of Us multiplayer project was canceled means that development on Part 3 will be much quicker, but I'm also hoping that Naughty Dog realizes the outcry from fans following the multiplayer game's cancellation means that we really want something like that back. I really don't know why Sony and Naughty Dog walked away from the Last of Us multiplayer experiences, because the first game had such a great PvP experience and it really wasn't that complex. It was basically just a handful of game modes built into the combat system of the single player game, and a lot of people had a blast with it. The Last of Us games have excellent combat and shooting, and I really think it would be wise for Naughty Dog to find new ways to experience that gameplay loop, and a great way to do that would be to return to the factions multiplayer format of the original game. And now that brings us to the next big question that everyone is asking: when could we finally get a reveal for The Last of Us Part 3, and when might this thing release? Right now, the strongest theory is that Sony will want a major showcase moment, something on the level of a PlayStation showcase or possibly even the Game Awards, but let's be real, they are likely going to want it to be at like a PlayStation event, because this isn't just another sequel, it's arguably the biggest prestige IP for PlayStation. If Naughty Dog really is reusing some of the groundwork from the canceled multiplayer project, that could cut down the development time significantly, meaning we might not be waiting as long as we did between Part 1 and 2, but then there's the reality that they're currently focused on Intergalactic. Now you could say that they could walk and chew bubblegum similar to Insomniac, but it's Naughty Dog. I don't think they can at this point. Now, some insiders believe that we could get an official reveal as early as late 2025 or sometime in 2026, with a release window targeted for 2027, which that lines up with Sony's next wave of big exclusives meant to carry the PS5 into its later years and potentially even serve as a cross-generation title with whatever PlayStation 6 ends up being. Obviously, nothing is concrete yet, but the timing of this leak and the cancellation of the standalone multiplayer project and the studio's history of really long development cycles all point to the next probably 2 years being a really interesting time for The Last of Us fans. Again though, we're gonna have to wait until Intergalactic is out, and that game still probably is another 2 years away. So if we get The Last of Us Part 3, they would already have to be in development with it, which is possible that they already are, because according to Neil Druckmann, Naughty Dog does have a secret project they're working on. So yeah, is that game going to be The Last of Us Part 3? Could it be a new IP? Could it be Uncharted 5? Perhaps they're working on something brand new alongside Intergalactic. It's hard saying, but either way, that's going to wrap it up with this video, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe with your noties on, and until next time, this has been Wes, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.